about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I am your host this morning. You're catching us in the third of four segments, and I'm happy to be with you this morning. I appreciate your working with us. We are going to discuss in this segment the Comcast merger. And the reason I think this one's an important one for us to address is because there is there's a phrase that I'm using associated with this, and it's very simple, but it's an age-old phrase. You know, you remember the countdowns. Well, and then there were 5. Why do I say that? Well, let's understand that right now, at least as of this moment, there are 6 entities which basically control everything that you see and hear and read and think and do, and they control everything that you know. They control access to all of the programming that you watch, and I do use the programming with the emphasis on the word programming because that's essentially what it is. But more importantly, there is no accountability for these Ministry of Propaganda mainstream media organizations. For the record, there are 6 corporations out there that pretty much control everything that you read and see and hear. 2 of them, one is Comcast, and the other is Time Warner. Now, both of these organizations own massive media organizations, including programming, including transmission systems, cable systems, the whole gamut. But Comcast announced the other day, or in February actually, that they would be buying Time Warner Cable for $45 billion. Now, this would create the largest cable provider in the nation. They would have more than 33 million customers. Now, this is cable. This isn't satellite now, remember. That's a third of the U.S. cable and satellite television market. In other words, there's only 100 million households. They'll have a third of it. Here's the problem. The FCC obviously has to approve this merger. But there's a little game that's going on now about how Comcast has spent so much money to buy the Democratic Party, and they have over 100 lobbyists. They've been buying off the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, I might add, for a very, very long time in anticipation of this coming merger. They employ over 100 lobbyists. This is Comcast alone. Forget Time Warner now. Just Comcast. They have over 100 lobbyists who spent $19 million last year on lobbying activities. The president of Comcast is a golfing buddy of President Obama's. He's also a very, very heavy Democratic donor. He's contributed thousands of dollars, not only to Obama's presidential campaigns, but also to the actual Democratic parties. Specifically in Pennsylvania is the greatest, where he lives. Comcast is a Pennsylvania company. They're based in Philadelphia, or in the outskirts of Philadelphia. They've donated millions of dollars to the Democrat Senatorial Campaign Committee, the DNC Services Corporation, to Steny Hoyer, Kirsten Gillibrand, Bob Casey. Now, Brian Roberts is the CEO, but his brother is his executive vice president, is David Cohen. Now, he's a former aide to Ed Rendell, who was a big dog in the Democratic Party and used to be the mayor of Philadelphia. Cohen skirts lobbying regulations through these loopholes, and he's very, very adept at it. He's raised $2 million for Obama since 2007. And in 2011, he hosted a DNC fundraiser in which the president called him my friend. He's also visited the White House 14 times since 2010 alone. 2 of those visits were to the Oval Office itself. And he's basically played a major role in the Comcast Foundation, which has dispersed more than $3 billion. Hang on, it gets worse. They've dispersed more than $3 billion since 2001, primarily to, quote, groups that serve African Americans, Latinos, and Asians, and other segments of the Democratic coalition. Now, of the $33 million that Comcast spent on political campaigns since 1989, more than half of that, or $18 million, has gone to Democrats. Barack Obama is the number one on the list. There are also 4 Republicans on the list. And that means that if 18 of the 33 million went to Democrats, that means that the rest of it went to Republicans. So never let it be said that Comcast is not an equal opportunity corrupter and that both parties are not equal opportunists. They are. Now, here's the problem. Comcast owns NBC Networks. They also own MSNBC, MSLSD. They share staff and resources with NBC News. NBC is one of the most staunch supporters of the president. They are a mainstream network news television organization. MSNBC is their loud and vociferous and slightly crazy uncle, but they keep them alive. You have to realize that this is only Comcast. Time Warner has given $29 million to political campaigns. And again, more than half of that went to Democrats, but the other half went to Republicans. The top recipients were Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and John Kerry. Hello. The president and the CEO of Time Warner donated personally $8,500 to the Democrats since 2010 alone. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So we know those guys are corrupt, right? Okay. We can assume that, they're interested in expanding their play. Here's the problem. The chairman of the FCC, who's going to ultimately rule over whether or not this merger happens, he is a former venture capitalist and a former lobbyist for telecommunications interests. Now, he's appointed. Wheeler was appointed, and he was appointed by Obama in 2013, last year. The fact that he was appointed after having been a telecom lobbyist ought to tell you a lot. And a venture capitalist, I might add. Now, I don't consider a venture capitalist on a par with a former lobbyist. But when you have the two combined together, and he was a lobbyist for telecommunications interests, which are regulated and relegated by the FCC, the whole thing stinks of corruption. The problem is, as if that wasn't bad enough, the lobbyist for Comcast and Wheeler, the now FCC ex-lobbyist, know each other very, very well. And Wheeler was an Obama campaign bundler before he became the FCC chairman. He raised between $200,000 and $500,000 for Obama's first race, personally maxed out his campaigns to the DNC, and he bundled at least $500,000 for the president's re-election campaign in 2012. You see, the problem is we've got a guy sitting as the chairman of the FCC about to approve a merger by two companies which he's intimately familiar with, quite frankly, is achieving the agenda and the administration's goals, is a propaganda mouthpiece for the administration, and now they're going to go before a board that's going to review their merger, and it's a friendly board. I mean, in fact, Cohen, remember now, I mean, this is actually fairly stunning, actually. Cohen has actually come out and said, quote, "I have been struck by the absence of rational, knowledgeable voices in this space, coming out in opposition or even raising serious questions about the transaction." He said this during a C-SPAN interview. Now, what he's basically saying is that nobody's talking about this. This whole thing, since its announcement in February, is very hush-hush. The only people who have written opposition against this thing is the Writers Guild of America, a Washington Post columnist by the name of Catherine Rampell, and of all people, Al Franken. I tell you what, Al Franken and I couldn't agree on whether or not he should breathe air. But in this case, I got to agree with him. Could you imagine if, for example, one of the companies that was a major player out there had decided that they were going to merge with Rupert Murdoch and the Fox organization. Now remember, Rupert Murdoch owns Fox News or Fox Network, but he also, in addition to that, owns the Wall Street Journal and a lot of other publications and news media. Suppose that the Koch brothers, the demonized Koch brothers, stated that they were going to create a news network and, buy MSNBC outlets, say, and toss them all and start over with a brand new crop of conservatives. What you'd have is a public outcry about corporate consolidation, too much in one hand. The truth is, this merger is going to happen. And sadly, I don't think there's a darn thing we can do about it. But what I can tell you is, if ever there was an understanding that things were completely upside down and that there is no rational, true, there's no true representation of the patriot viewpoint in this country, this is the proof, folks. Fox, and I know, a lot of people listen to Fox News and they think that's the be-all and the end-all. They're controlled opposition. Let's be candid. I know there's people that will disagree with me on that, and I'm sure that you're entitled to. This is only my opinion. But I can tell you this. There's an enormous amount of information Fox doesn't cover. And that's what makes me worry. It's not a question of what do they address. It's what don't they address. Why is Fox running ads for Common Core? Have you noticed? Fox News, in the middle of Fox News, in their primetime lineup, they're running pro-Common Core ads. Really? Isn't it interesting that there was a silence of crickets when Common Core was and the parents around the nation were fed up with it and going into the school systems and fighting back. Still are. What do you hear from Fox? Nothing. Why is that? What have you heard from Fox on this merger? Hey, listen, I get it. If Fox reports on it, people will say, well, that's just sour grapes. You're just upset because they're going to be as big as you, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But it's still newsworthy. If ABC and CBS were designing a merger, you would report on that. The only reason they're not reporting on it is because they're okay with it. Because they're already one of the six. And they're one of the bigger. We are down to 5 sources of information in this country, folks. Or we will be shortly. And what that tells us is that alternative media will be under even greater pressure than they're already. In other words, you know, I've suggested out there many, many times that part of the goal of what we're facing, or part of the goal of what we're facing here in this issue, this media shield law from Chuck Schumer and the like, is the fact that they're trying to silence alternative media. And why nobody seems to be talking about this one is, I mean, kind of interesting. When you've got David Cohen, the executive vice president of Comcast, who comes out and says, I'm amazed that there's been an absence of rational, knowledgeable voices coming out in opposition or even raising serious questions about the transaction. Quote, unquote, ladies and gentlemen. The largest cable company in the country is going to buy the second largest and gain control over 19 of the top 20 markets in the nation and have a 30% market share in cable and a 40% share in broadband, and nobody's asking any questions. There's a second article out there in the New York Times today, and this one is actually fairly reasonable. He asks a number of questions about the merger. One, is the merger good for the American consumer? 2, why isn't there more competition in the cable business? 3, should one company own a lot of pipes and much of what goes through them? 4, is the cable merger about cable or something else? 5, is the deal really good for innovation and creativity in this space? And 6, will a bigger Comcast allow other broadband options to flourish? I would encourage you to read that, because I look at this article and he asks intellectual questions that show that he's at least got a critical thinking mind. David Carr is the author there. You can find it straight off the Drudge Report. It's on the right side of the Drudge Report, I think. Or if not, you can look in the segment on the video. It's on our website. It's on Facebook, America's Voice Now, and so forth. Or you can look for the link in the YouTube section if you're watching this on YouTube. The point of all of this is simply this, folks. We already have a desperate shortage of independent voices in this country. The mainstream media, the Ministry of Propaganda, does everything in its power to knock alternative media off of the soapbox that it has, so that we can actually educate and inform American people about the real true nature of what's happening in our country. Now that field of the 6 companies, which is obviously far too small in the first place, is going to get even smaller. The Ministry of Propaganda is not only alive and well in the United States of America, it's growing. And it's growing at your expense and its stated goal of your misdirection. There's no doubt about it that the whole purpose of media today is not to educate and inform, but to indoctrinate. If you are a television watcher, you are being programmed, whether you believe it or not. I think you know. I do believe that you know. I think you're unwilling to do what's necessary to change it, but I think you know. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle our last and final topic, which is the level of police tyranny in the police state in general, including a California guy who's running for the Attorney General in California who states that politicians who betray their constituencies should be executed. Wow, we've actually got a politician who's talking strong language. There's an interesting poll I'll expose to you when we get back. We're going to take a quick break. We'll return in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us live at americasvoicenow.org.